Welcome back to the Listening Well podcast. I'm Brittany.
And my name is Jenna.
And today we're on episode 5, and we're going to talk today about grief. All right. And man, there's just been, grief is a huge part of everyone's story. You know, it's something that connects every human being together because everybody experiences grief at some point in their life. And so, yeah, we want to talk today what that looks like, biblically as well as scientifically and medically and, all the things. But I wanted to start off with, this is kind of my own definition of grief. I think Webster's dictionary is super short, but this has been a kind of a working definition from experience. All right. So you can agree with it or not agree with it. That's okay. But for me, grief is a normal, healthy, and God-given response to process loss. And I say God-given because we recognize that, again, Genesis 3, that disease, sickness, brokenness, pain, and death were not part of God's original design, but became a consequence of the fall, which is why we all are impacted by it at some point in our life. And so God in his goodness, and I know when you're going through grief, you don't see grief as the goodness of God. Yeah. And that's okay. This is months and years removed from being thick in the grieving process. All right. So this is like retrospect. But the goodness of God says, I'm going to allow you to experience love on such a level that when it's gone, you go through a process to heal. Because the alternative to that is we feel nothing. We're cold. We're totally unimpacted by it. And if you're grieving right now, that sounds probably pretty good. Like I would give anything to not be grieving right now. I would give everything to feel cold and feel numbed and feel anything but
I would say too, there are people who probably that is what they're feeling and they don't necessarily want to feel that way too. Because I mean, sometimes it's like when you are experiencing in the depths of just despair, you feel numb. Yeah,
absolutely. So. Yeah, and we're going to talk about numbness and shock and kind of the role that, the stages of grief have. But it's part of our world. Pain and death are a reality of the world that we live in. And until Jesus comes back, it will continue to be. But God gives us a tool called grief to be able to process through the loss in time with him. All right. And so we see grief played out in the Bible, right? Like we see, Hannah wants a son so bad. And she prays to God that she will, become pregnant and bear a son. But when it doesn't happen, the discouragement and mourning and lament she experiences is real, right? We've got Naomi and Ruth. Naomi lost her husband and lost all of her sons. And we see her, she is mourning. She's grieving, right? You brought up Job in previous episodes. Job loses his family. He loses his wealth. He loses his health. And we see him sitting in ashes, which was a first century kind of process, a way of mourning. We see him sitting in his ashes, mourning and grieving the situation that he finds himself in. And we see David and Jonathan were besties. And the love that they had for one another, the Bible said, it was deep, it was real, brotherly love. And when Jonathan dies, the impact that had on David was, very real grief, right? Very real mourning and sadness and sorrow. And here's the example I love the most.
Oh.
You gonna guess it?
The Jesus wept?
Yeah, Jesus. Like Jesus, we find Jesus grieving in the New Testament. In Matthew 14, John the Baptist has just been beheaded. And when news hits Jesus that John the Baptist has died, does Jesus respond with, all right, it's all right, let's buck up and keep going, let's pull our britches up and like keep going on this, guys, like it's gonna be fine, it's gonna be okay, everything happens for a reason? No. He withdraws, he isolates, he spends time mourning the death of John the Baptist. And then when Lazarus dies, right, we've got that situation, and news reaches Jesus's ears that Lazarus has died. He goes to Mary and Martha, and he sees their grief, and he empathizes. Like he weeps. Shortest verse in the Bible.
Yep.
Jesus wept.
Yep.
He weeps. He grieves the loss of Lazarus. And so there is room. There is biblical evidence and space to mourn and grieve the loss of those that we love.
Yeah.
Okay. And so normalizing that. Now, God doesn't just leave us in that state of hopelessness. There is a season of that, right? Like he sits with us in that state, but he also, like John, in the Gospel of John, he says, there will be trouble. There will be trouble in this world, but, my favorite word in the Bible is but take courage, for I have overcome the world. And then in John 14:18, how do you pick a favorite verse? But one of my favorite verses, Jesus says, I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. We talked in an earlier podcast about how God continually moves toward his people. He never, ever leaves us. There's a classic book. It's called Night. And Elie Wiesel authored the book. He was a victim of the Holocaust in a concentration camp. And he wrote the book after his liberation. And in that book, he recalls a situation, a story, an incident in the concentration camp where, and I hope this isn't a trigger, but the Nazi soldiers are stringing kids up by their necks and hanging, and they're making the Jewish prisoners watch. And if anyone is caught closing their eyes or turning away from watching it happen, they were shot on sight. And so Eli he's recalling this memory, this story, and he says, I remember hearing the tears of the prisoners behind me wailing and crying, my God, where is God? And in that moment, he said, I heard a small, still voice say, I'm right here. I am weeping with you. God does not leave us abandoned in our sorrow and in our brokenness.
Yeah.
He sits, he's present, and he weeps with us, just like Jesus wept for John, for Lazarus. He knows, Jesus knows better than anybody the weight and consequence of death.
Yeah.
He experienced it. He knows it. He is no stranger. And how good is God that he doesn't turn his back or leave us abandoned at any point in our grieving journey, but he's constantly there, moving toward us, sitting with us, and he's patient with us. Like, God long suffers us. Like, he is patient with us. And so he'll sit with us in the pit. He'll sit with us in that dark, cold, void space where it seems like my world is over. But at some point in the journey, because of the grieving process that he's given us, he doesn't just sit forever. Like, we don't sit forever. But at one point, he's going to take us by the hand and slowly but steadily move us to healing, okay? To heal through our grief. And that's what the grieving process is all about. The stages of grief that there are purposes for them. And again, grieving is a God-given process. It's a response to the death and pain that we experience in this world. And so shock is usually one of the first stages of grief. And that is a God-given response so that our body doesn't become overwhelmed with all of these emotions all at once, or we wouldn't be able to handle it. Like, shock helps absorb the initial sting of that loss. Pain, the emotional roller coaster, right, is intentional. It has a purpose. It helps validate the loss, that what we had with that person wasn't in vain. Like, where there is deep love, there's going to be deep hurt. And so we go through emotions, and we go through, I've got a handout here that I'm going to grab in just a second. But the emotions are, roller coaster, and it's up, it's down, it's front, it's back, it's 2 steps forward and 5 steps back and 5 steps forward and 2 steps back. And it's a journey through our emotions and navigating that loss. Bargaining, I've been here. Like, I did this a lot when we went through things with Jacob, but bargaining is a revelation of almost deeper pain. Like, it's a level of processing grief that, like, you're usually at your lowest point. And so it helps process through the confusion and the doubt, the things that we are experiencing. And this is what Hannah does in Scripture. She says, Lord, she's grieving, right? Like, she can't get pregnant. And she's grieving, she's mourning, she's desperate, and she bargains with God, pleads with God, if you give me a son, I will give him back to you. I will dedicate him back to you and place him in the arms of you. And what does God do? He answers that prayer. But she's got to live up to her end of the bargain. She has to give her child over to Eli the priest to be raised. She's not raising him. She has to give him over. And this is exactly, like, Hannah is my girl, because we struggled for 10 years of infertility. And I prayed, God, if you would just, and it was a son, if you would just give me a son, I will give him back to you. And we get Jacob Israel. And then we have to give Jacob Israel back over. And now we live in this constant end of our bargain of, Lord, I prayed, give me a son. If you do, I'll give him back to you. And he's not being raised by a priest. Like, he's in the thick of it. Like, I would say he's in Pharaoh's palace, right? Like, he's in Egypt right now. And yet we have to live up to our end to say, we are going to pray for him. We are literally every day choosing to give him back over to the Lord, to say, we have no control over parenting him, what his life looks like. So Lord, like, it's a whole new level of desperation and dependence on God, that I have the hope and assurance that one day we will see Jacob Israel in heaven because of the prayers that us and so many people have prayed for his salvation. So bargaining is a natural, again, kind of God-given response to help process grief. And then resiliency or acceptance, this one is really misunderstood, because we view acceptance as, we're over it. Yeah. We've moved on. All is good now. And that's not what acceptance means. I like to view acceptance as resiliency. It's learning. It's a place, a point where we've gotten in our grief journey that we've developed resiliency to learn to live with the loss. Mm-hmm. And this is where we talk about a lot about tools and tool belts with not just grief, but with anxiety and other things. Is it's not that it ever goes away, but we learn to live with it. We learn to carry it, and it just becomes part of our story and part of who we are. And the hope and acceptance and resiliency is that it's not just we've learned to move with it. I don't like to say move on. I like to say move with it or move through it. Not just for ourselves, but allowing God to redeem that situation to help others as well. Yeah. Like, I call it purpose in the pain. Like, God, don't waste this. Let it be used to help walk with someone else who is currently grieving or going through this process, to sit with them and to be able to say, I know it hurts. There is hope. I know it hurts. Hope is coming. And don't forget that Jesus is right there with you. He has not left you. And so getting to a place where we don't forget it, it's not that it hurts any less, but we've learned to live with it and allowed God to redeem it for his glory and for the sake of others.
Yeah. And I think too, just like remembering that like every individual is different. It can take someone a couple months or...
Keep talking, I'm going to get that hand out.
It could take someone a couple months or years. I mean, from my own personal experience, I was very close with my grandfather. And when he passed away, I mean, this was in 2017, I think. And there's moments where I think about him and it is so devastating. And you have those moments where you miss that love and that connection. And it's hard because I know from my own personal experience, when I was younger, when in the thick of it, I would compare myself to my family, for example, and compare their grieving process to my own and question, well, if they're able to seem like they're fine, which in all reality, they may not have been. They were just doing it in their own way that they needed. And it was so hard for me to understand that it's okay for me to still feel the way that I feel. And like in the thick of it, it's really hard because you don't understand. I mean, we lost him suddenly, and it was during a time when my grandmother was going through a lot of health issues, and so we had that stress, and then also like he passed, and it was a very hard, difficult time in our lives. And even now, like I can still get emotional and still feel that grief. But in the same token, it's gotten easier.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's such a great point that you brought up about everybody being at different stages and grieving differently. I know when we lost Jay, we had people that like just took his pictures down and never talked about it, never brought it up. And that was at first was really, really hurtful and hard to understand. Like, I want to talk. I need to talk about him. I need to keep him alive. I need to keep him part of this family because that's what's helpful to me. But for them, it was too painful. For them, they grieved differently. And I had to come to a place of grace to say, oh yeah, they're not doing this to be jerks. They're doing it because it's what they know and have to do to process through it. And so recognizing that everybody's at different stages, at different points, and grieve different. There's no manual for it. There's no timeline. It is literally a very unique process. And this is the handout. I had it here the whole time. I didn't have to get up. But the stages of grief, we often find this like we expect this nice, clean, like linear process where you think of the stages of grief and you think of a checklist, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, shock, done. Bargaining, done. Not quite to acceptance yet, but depression, done, or in it. And we think it's this linear checklist of we move through the stages and then we get over it. But in reality, this is the experience. It's messy and it's all over. It's up and down and back and forth. And my counselor was really, really good to help point out, we call it the roadmap to healing. And there's, it takes the grief stages and kind of puts it in a map format. And there's a road kind of along the map. And she asked the question, what do you notice? There were arrows on the road. She said, what do you notice about the arrows on the road? And because all I could see was there's a road to to healing. And I'm like, I want that. Like, I want to get there. How do I do this? Get me on the fast track. And that's when she pointed out, like, what do you notice about the road? And there were two arrows. There was an arrow pointing forward and there was an arrow pointing backward. And I said, there's two arrows and they're pointing both directions. And she said, yeah, that's grief. It is forward and it is backward. And give yourself grace and give the other person grace to take those steps back, to sit back in depression, knowing they're going to move forward again. You're going to move forward again. But this was a step back, and that's okay. It's okay. So it's not this clean, beautiful, linear process or journey where you do a bunch of check marks and you're done. It's a lifelong journey of, again, getting to, when she asked me to define what does healing look like for you, my first answer was, I have no idea. I have no idea. Like, I don't know what healing looks like. I don't know. And then I was able to say, healing for me, this was like months after, I said, I think healing for me is learning to live with it and be gracious to myself, to not beat myself up for when I have missteps or when I've been told you're taking too long. It's no. Healing is learning to live with it and give myself grace when there are steps back. And I can honestly say, being 7 years removed now with that situation with Jay, I'm in that resiliency stage of life where it's just part of who I am. It's part of my story. But it doesn't wreck me every day like it once did. And I am able to come alongside of others to learn to live with it well and not, go into some really unhealthy or deconstructive habits, destructive habits, to deal with it, but to learn to live with it with the Lord, and Him use it and redeem it as part of the story. And He has, and He continues to. And it's so beautiful, but it's so messy and so hard. And so give yourself grace if you're in that season right now. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay to have seasons where you withdraw and you just don't want to be around people. Just don't stay there forever. Allow someone in at some point to sit with you and help process with you through that. And so, that, did you have anything before we go on to like how we help?
Mostly just like, I'm sure everyone, because of the fact that we've all experienced grief, like we know the physical feelings. I mean, like your heart, you literally like feel like your heart's been like ripped out of you and stuff. But I mean, just like scientifically, they've found that like grief can impact your mental health, leading to guilt, anger, restlessness, and then can lead to anxiety, substance abuse. And there's also been connections with physical illnesses like heart disease, cancer, high blood pressure. And just like understanding that, yes, grief is something that you feel on the inside, but it can affect so many other things.
Absolutely. And I would say, when we went through things, I was a pretty independent, like I would say I was, and however way you want to define it, but like considered myself a strong, independent girl, like woman, like I'm good. I was pretty healthy, navigated things pretty healthily, or what would be considered healthy. And then when we lost our Jacob Israel, something in me broke. Like my brain and body broke. Yeah. And I've never been the same. And so while I live in this resiliency, right, of it's part of my story, it's I'm learning to live with it, God's redeeming it, but there are still consequences from that situation through grief that I had horrible PTSD. I still battle with anxiety. And though the impacts of grief are real. Yeah. And so again, like we have this, I don't want to be too generalized, but typically, often, people have this idea of grief being linear, clean, you get through the stages, and then you're over it. Like, there's no lasting impacts. But in reality, there's incredibly lasting impacts. And we see that sometimes through things that you just listed. And I know for me, anxiety is one of them that I've had to learn to navigate through and still continue to navigate through. But yeah, grief can be a game changer in a lot of ways for us, on our bodies and so forth.
Okay, so yeah, how do we, if you are someone who isn't necessarily experiencing grief right now and you're saying, okay, I get it, but how do I help someone that I know who is? And so, yeah. Again,
like I'm going to throw out that curiosity piece that we talked about in the previous episode of stigmas and learning to walk with people. Yeah. I think as we get curious about people, when we care to move toward them, to lean in, to ask, how are you really doing? Yeah. All right.
Not the simple, how are you doing? Oh, I'm fine. I'm good.
Yeah. The plastic Barbie answer. No, thanks. So I think being curious again about where people are at, how they're doing, allows for that person to, and it's their choice if they want to open up, but if they do, being able to meet them where they're at, to normalize it. And I would say at first, like, you don't have to say anything. Yeah. The words that we say to people who are raw in their grief matters. Yeah. And so to me, like, this is going to sound really silly, but to me it goes back to, if you can't say something nice, then don't say it at all. Like, there's no good answer. There really isn't. And I think learning to be okay with that, like embrace that right now that person doesn't want to hear, like, God's good all the time. Like,
I just think about like how you made the connection. I don't know if it was in this one or the last one, but how we had someone be vulnerable at church on Sunday. Yes. And he had said that, like, in the thick of it, when they had lost their little girl, that he just needed someone to sit in it with him and to like sit in it with him and his wife. And he brought up Job, and I bring up Job a lot, but and how the first 7 days his friends, all they did was just sit with him. Yeah. And how the individual who had shared this, how that's all he desired in those moments was, I don't need someone to tell me these things that I already know. Like, I don't need someone to tell me that God has a plan, or I don't need someone to tell me that God is with me. And I mean, it is helpful in that, but also a lot of the times we know. Yeah. But in the same token, it's like, we just need someone next to us, like there.
Yep. I can tell you the people when we were going through things that literally kicked the door down. Like, they weren't just texting and asking, how are you doing? They were literally like, hey, can I come over? And I would say no. Like, I don't want to see anybody. And they came anyway, and they didn't say a word. They sat on my couch with me and cried. And that was so meaningful. And so, yeah, our go-to is to fix. Like, we want you to feel better. And the only way we know how to do that is to provide words and to say the right thing. And that will come. There will be a time to give good theology that is healing, right? The Lord is present with you. That is good theology that is helpful and healing. But initially, like, don't be afraid to just embrace silence and let them lead. Like, if they want to talk about it, lean into that. If they don't want to talk about it, lean into that. And I think just be there. Something that is really interesting when it comes to grieving in America, when we look at other cultures who mourn loss, there are countries and cultures and tribes that like they got it going on. Like, they have mastered the art of grieving well. There are cultures that if a mother loses a child, the women in that community will take turns for 1 year coming to the house and sitting with the mom.
Oh, wow.
Everybody will sit with that woman for 1 year. They take turns.
That's amazing.
And just not to offer anything but their presence. In other cultures, I think it's it might be Italy, but don't quote me on that, where the anniversary of the death, all the family gets together and they just mourn that 1 year anniversary. In America, you get 1 day. You get the funeral. And that's it. And Dave and I worked out, when we were in Kenton, we worked out a system that honestly, it just worked really well for us, mostly because of where I was at, also someone who is also grieving, where I would become really overwhelmed when somebody would be experiencing loss, because it ripped my Band-Aid back open. And I experienced grief all over again and went through all of the things again. And it was very, very hard. Dave is a great first responder. So he was there meeting with the family. And I discovered that my role at that time, like, he's the first responder and I'm the one putting it on my calendar 3 months later, 6 months later, 9 months later, and a year later, putting it on my calendar, reminding me to reach out to that person after the fact. When the funeral is over, everybody else has moved on. Somebody needs to follow up and say, how are you doing? And again, because, like, thanks be to God, I'm in this kind of resilience stage where I've learned to live with it. I would say I'm in a healthy space with that loss, with that grief, that I'm able to now be a first responder. But back then, like, there was no way. I mean, I remember crawling into my bathtub, weeping, praying Dave wouldn't come home, that he wouldn't see me in that state, because there was another loss in our church and I couldn't handle it. I couldn't physically, emotionally, and spiritually handle grieving anymore. And God was gracious to help me along the journey there. But yeah, I think in America we do really bad at how to grieve. And so learning to show up, to follow up, to listen, to sit well, and just to be there. And I would say, we're at NapNaz, and we've got all kinds of programs and different things, and Life Group is one of the ministries of this church, and it's a great ministry. And I would say Life Group is probably one of the best opportunities we can learn to be authentic, to love and live well with others, to allow space for people to bring their stuff and us not try to fix it, but to weep with them, to sit with them. Eventually, you're going to say, like, there's hope and Jesus is with you and present, and that those are all true. But an opportunity to just allow us to authentically and vulnerably do life together.
Yeah.
And not put on the church face that all is good. I'm following Jesus.
Yep.
I'm living that dream. I say that every Sunday. How you doing? I'm living the dream. Sometimes one nightmare at a time, but I'm living the dream. But learning to provide a safe space where we can just authentically bring our whole selves and be loved right there in that moment. That's my prayer. For our place, for our church, for our ministries here at NapNaz. And listen, I would say, I know empathy, is not everybody's deal. So, 8 years ago, I took a personality strengths finder test. Dave had us do it at our previous church for all of the leadership and church board and things. And so just to know our gifts and how we're wired, how we can better understand each other. And I was it was all about production, checklists, getting it done. Very task oriented and not very people oriented, I would say. And then Jacob happens. And I told you, something in me broke.
Yeah.
But God, through that pain and that season, has retooled me. He literally, it's like he remolded me. I was like a mess on the floor that just fell apart in my grief, right? And as he's picking me up and he's molding me back together, it's like he just made me new and retooled me. And my before, empathy, like I said, people wasn't my thing. Empathy was nowhere near my top 5 strengths. Empathy is my number 1 strength.
Yeah.
And that is not something that I did on my own. That is a working of the Holy Spirit. That is him taking something that was broken and painful and literally redeeming it and making it new and purposeful.
Yeah.
For the help and sake of others and all to his glory. And so I pray, some of you are not going to like this, I'm sorry, but I pray for God to break people. I pray for God to break the hearts of people for other people, that we would begin moving toward others, that we would soften in our views toward them and our hearts toward them, and that our hearts would break and we would be compassionate and empathetic and curious about what is going on in the other person.
I think too, if you might be in the boat that you don't necessarily know what empathy is, and through my schooling, there's this one video that they would show us where it was with animals, and there was this animal who had fallen in a well and was alone in this darkness and didn't know how to get out. And then there was 2 other animals. There was one that stood at the top of the well and was like, "Hey, I see you're not doing well." "Oh, yeah, cool, okay." And they weren't necessarily in it with them, whereas the person who was showing empathy got down in the well with them and said, "I'm here with you.
Yeah.
What can I do for you?
Yeah.
I understand that it hurts.
Yeah.
And I wish that I can help you."
Absolutely. Yes. And that's what Jesus modeled so beautifully. Is he always provided hope and a way out, but he saw the person first. He didn't just enter a situation and try to fix them. He sat with them, he loved them, and then he healed, or he offered a way through or a way out. And that's what he does with us. And I think that's a great model of just how we love people well in their grief and in their pain and in their mourning. It's just be there, just sit with them, and it goes such a long way.
Yeah.
Like, it truly is healing and helpful. But
to end, so one of the things that I always say is, if you want to be empathetic, you have to be vulnerable. And Brene Brown is a well-renowned author. She's done a bunch of research on just like leadership and vulnerability in general. And here's a quote that I'd like to end on is, vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage.
Ooh. Oh, what a great definition, and what a great way to end. Like, we all have an opportunity to be vulnerable, and it takes time. You don't just jump into a relationship and say, hey, here's my best, but over time, as we move toward one another in love, and again, just being curious about the other person, we begin to learn depths of vulnerability, and in those moments we learn to be safe in the arms of another, or not to be safe in the arms of another if the response is more harmful. But I would say to this church, just continue to live into what the Lord is leading you to. Continue to lean on Him for strength and guidance and the courage to step into maybe uncomfortable spaces with people who are hurting and grieving. And you don't have to have all the answers. It's okay. We don't have the answers. The only answer we really have is Jesus. And that's okay. So, grief. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Listening Well.